Hello.
Thank you for joining me today. I think from your conversations, we had off the back of one of my LinkedIn posts, it was really, I think, eye-opening of how you think compared to a lot of leaders that I do work with. But before I start waffling on,
Yeah.
you came up as an apprentice and you've got quite strong opinions on how the industry builds talent. Give me a minute or two of how you got where you are right now.
Okay. Yeah, I did start on the apprenticeship route. If you go back to when I was a teenager,
Yeah.
not many people went to university. I think it was just over 5%.
Oh, wow.
So, it was only a sort of a decade later that you ended up with the target of trying to get 50% of people to university. So that meant that the majority of engineers got into engineering through an apprenticeship. And generally, the majority of people left school at 16, and you either went for A levels and then hopefully university, or you went into an apprenticeship, or you got some other training, or you just went straight into a job. And I was born and brought up in Leamington, so the obvious place to go for an apprenticeship was automotive products, which had AP Lockheed and AP Racing and AP Borg and Beck. And I started an apprenticeship in 1988 at the age of 16 there, and did 4 years. And that was it was a very good training because they took on about 30 apprentices every year. Some of them went into the workshops and became tool makers. Some of them became design engineers or development engineers. Some went into process, and some were commercial. So they went into sales or accountancy and all that kind of thing. I finished my apprenticeship in 1992 and became a design engineer. And then after a few years, I left and joined Rover Group in the days that they were owned by BMW, working on the new Mini and a few other things. I then left there and went back to AP because I think it was a more interesting job. And then 19 years ago, I left AP to join Alcon, and after a few years became chief engineer. We're split into three sort of main market areas. So we've got a chief engineer for motorsport, a chief engineer for performance OEM, so supplying people like Aston Martin and Peugeot and General Motors. And then there's a third area which we call special vehicles, and that handles defence vehicles, civilian armoured, emergency services, airport ground control, construction, agricultural, anything really that isn't a fast car comes under that area, and it's that area that I'm chief engineer for.
Nice. So when you mentioned the apprenticeships and people went into different roles, did you get to choose which route you went down, or were you told kind of that's where your strengths are and that's where you're going to go?
It was actually done on qualifications.
Oh,
So
okay.
I was the first year that did GCSEs,
Yeah.
and basically if you had, you applied with your predicted grades, and that sent you down whether you were either doing a technician apprenticeship or a craft apprenticeship. So that decided whether you were going to be in the tool room or an experimental machine shop or whatever. And then when you got your grades, you were pretty much split between product, which meant you were going to be in design or development, or production. So if you had higher grades for maths and sort of that kind of thing, then they pushed you more towards the design side. So I got pushed towards the design side and spent 4 years going around design departments and development departments and test and designing, learning how to design clutches and brakes for racing cars and all sorts of things. So it was a very, very good apprenticeship, probably one of the best apprenticeships in the Midlands at the time.
How would you compare the apprenticeships to what you've done to what you see today?
I think it depends on the company. So if you're a serious company and you really want to get the best out of young people, then you run an apprenticeship pretty much the same way that I had mine. You try and move them around the business. You're only going to understand how to, what's required from a quality point of view if you spend time in quality. You're only going to understand how you develop vehicles and develop the product if you spend time in the test department. So generally you spent anything between 6 weeks and 6 months in different departments. And I think sort of the better companies now do something similar. You know, you move them around, and you know that you're not going to get much productivity out of the apprentice for a few years at least. But the important thing is giving them that grounding and that experience.
Yeah.
And some companies don't see that. It's, you know, they'll hire them, they'll put them in one department, and they will stay there for the 4 years. And you know, it's almost cheap labour, but you lose them 1 day a week on day release, and that's not really very productive.
No, and I think from the clients that I work with at the minute, we don't hire one person for one skill. It's very much you need to be able to turn your hand at different things and understand how it all fits together.
Yes.
And people who've only ever done one job, I think that's where they struggle, and it's really hard to then move them into those businesses.
Yeah.
But I mean, what else would you look for? So if they didn't have the right skills or they didn't have that wider remit, would you still consider someone like that into a position in your team that had the right attitude?
Yes, when you're interviewing somebody, you
Yeah.
can see if there's the potential.
Yeah.
And this is where, you know, sort of you, in a department, you need a good mix of people and a good mix of skills. And the larger the department you have, the more specialism you can get. But if you have a relatively small department or you're a relatively small company, you need some very flexible people who can do almost anything. And if you do see somebody who is, say, you know, just straight out of university, you're looking for that potential, but in the knowledge that you will then have to spend a lot of time giving them that experience and pushing them into other areas so that they can work with other departments and gain that experience.
Yeah.
One of the engineers I have working for me, we recruited him about 3 years ago, straight from university, and it was one of those moments where there were myself and one of the other chief engineers interviewed him, and as soon as he left the interview, we both looked at each other and said, you know what, there's something about him that, you know, shows real potential. And through the time that he's been working for me, he has by far exceeded the expectations that I would have. He's doing all sorts of different things, and you know, being pushed into lots of areas, supporting lots of different projects around the business. So it does work, but there's a certain amount of gut feeling which is difficult to actually describe.
Yeah, because that gut feeling can mean so many different things, can't it? So
Yeah.
you've got to learn to know whether it's a good gut feel or
Yes.
or a bad one.
Yeah.
We've obviously talked about apprentice trained engineers. You said something to me when we were having our conversation previously. You said apprentice trained engineers tend to be inventors and graduates tend to be analysts. That's a pretty bold claim, which I love. Unpack that for me. Like, where's your thought process come from that?
Right. Well, some of this comes back to, you know, when I was first starting, and it was the way that the training actually led you and what put you into that kind of environment. And then there was an article that was written by the old Duke of Edinburgh, you know, Prince Philip. He was an engineer and he did his training in the Navy, and he said he'd still got all his log books of learning how to become a mechanical engineer. And I think he ended up being the president of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. So he really understood what he was talking about. And he was passionate about engineering in this country. And what he said, and he wrote an article, I think it's about 15 years ago now, that said if you wanted a good engineering department, you needed a good mix of apprentice trained and graduate trained engineers. And the way that he saw it, and I agreed at the time, is the apprentice engineers, because you've gone into it because you're quite practical, you're the tinkerers, you're the ones who will take watches apart and clocks apart and put them back together and work out how it moves. So quite often they are the inventors. And he cited things like the Black & Decker Bullet Mate and the Brompton bike and all those kind of things were designed by apprentice trained engineers, not graduates.
Oh, wow.
And the idea that he had was they will come up with the ideas, and you've got a concept and you've got something that they can practically make. And then the graduate comes in, because they've had that graduate training, they will then look at the design, and quite often they'll analyse it and they will improve it. And they'll get all the squeaks and rattles and the vibrations out of it, and they will make it as something that is actually much better. And it's, you know, certainly quite a few years ago you would see that. and sort of you said, sort of engineering director. Well, our engineering director has got a PhD in vibration analysis. He is very, very clever on the analysis side.
Yeah.
And it really shows we are very different engineers. We've come from very different backgrounds, but our skills complement each other. I can only take a design so far. I can come up with an idea and I can come up with a concept and I can draw it out and get it to a certain point. But when it gets to the point where brakes are squealing or rattling or juddering or all the sorts of things that needs a bit more analysis understanding, he can then take that and just say, oh, well, if you try this and if you do that and if you put it through this analysis software, then he will, he's got the skills that will take that further into something that can be put on a Bentley or an Audi or something like that. And the drivers will drive in comfort without any disturbance. So that's a perfect combination
really smart
of how it works.
To think about it. And I've never thought about it like that, but it really makes sense.
Yeah. The danger is it's changed quite a bit in the last few years in that the drive for people going to university means that if you want to be an engineer, you're pushed down the graduate route. So a lot of those inventors and tinkerers are probably being a bit restrained from their tinkering and pushed down this is the theoretical way in which you design things. And we may lose something from that. So that means that the amount of traditional apprentice-trained engineers have been reducing, and we're probably suffering from that a bit. We need to sort of push more people who are not necessarily the academic engineers who want to learn about analysis and that side of it, to give them the opportunity to get into engineering so that you've got that good mix of skills.
Where do you think the pressure comes from when it comes to a lot of companies saying you need a degree? Do you think there's any thought process behind it, or?
I think it's as I said, when I started, there was not much more than 5% of people went to university. As you gradually get more people going to university and graduating and getting in jobs where they're the hiring person, then the first thing is you want to employ people who are similar to you. So you end up with a lot of people who are. Michael Spicer does a brilliant sketch on one of his comedy shows of you've got a lot of middle-aged white men around the table all called Tim. And all of the decisions are made by Tim as very similar. You don't want that in an engineering company, but there is a danger that if you've graduated and you believe in your skills and you believe in your training, the next person you will employ will be someone like you who's gone through the same training. And in the end, you end up with a team of graduate engineers who are very similar. So that's one thing. The other thing is then you gradually tell yourself that the only way to be an engineer is to have a degree. And if you go on LinkedIn, you'll see endless conversations and debates about whether you can be an engineer, whether you can design a product if you haven't got a degree. And there are some people who have very, very strongly held beliefs that you cannot be a design engineer or you cannot be a development engineer or anything like that unless you have a degree, because that is the only way to be trained. And it's absolute nonsense. There are lots of apprentice-trained engineers who are very good. There are people who have gone through other routes and ended up in engineering who are extremely good engineers. If you've got the aptitude and you've got the natural ability with maths and science and all the other things you need, then there's every chance that you can be a very good engineer.
Yeah. I remember the post I put up, there was a few people saying, oh, you shouldn't have the word engineer in your title if you've not had a degree.
Yeah.
And I said, where does that come from? But no one could actually give me a real answer, and I just thought it's what's ingrained in you and what you believe. It's not just because you believe it doesn't make it fact, right? And I think a lot of people don't want to have that conversation because a lot of bias does come into it.
Yes.
And they don't want to admit they're being biased, which is fine. And I think you need someone around you in your circle to go, we shouldn't be doing it that way. We need to do something different. But like you said, when you've got a load of people around you already who are like you and think like you and look like you and come from the same background, it's very unlikely they'll call you out on it.
Yeah, one of the last departments I was in on my apprenticeship was the AP Racing design office.
Yeah.
And these are the guys who at the time were designing calipers and discs for Formula One and NASCAR and everything that we do at Alcon.
Yeah.
It was one of our competitors. And there were about 20 or so of us in the office. 19 went through the apprenticeship route, 1 graduate.
Wow.
Because that was the way it was in design departments at the time. Graduates were the exception. Now, if you've got a team of people who are designing stuff for Formula One that haven't got a degree, that went through a 4-year apprenticeship, they left school at 16 with O-levels or GCSEs, not even A-levels, and they were the people who were designing stuff for Formula One. You do not need a degree to design something for Formula One. You know, it's that's how it was. So if you could do that then, you can do that now. It is only because if you tell yourself that the only reason why you're doing your job is because you've got a degree, and you turn it into a belief, then you will only employ people with degrees, and you will lose so much.
Yeah. It's crazy, and I don't think a lot of people want to have that conversation or open to having it, and
Yes.
I wouldn't say kind of debating it. There's another thing you talked about as well, which I love this, by the way. You push people to solve problems before giving them the answer.
Yes.
Does it create tension early on, and how do you kind of hold the line without losing people when you're doing that? Because I'm assuming, depending on the person and their skill set and the way they think,
I think most people like the idea of being given the opportunity to think or do the job that they really want to do. And it's very easy when you're new into a company to say, right, how do you want me to do this? Well, the question then is, no matter how much experience they've got, is, well, how would you do it? So it's almost the first few months you do actually say, can you do this? And this is how I want you to do it. And then very quickly you move on to well, just tell me how you would do it. Come up with a design or come up with a solution, then bring it to me and we'll talk through it. And the first few times there will be a case of, well, you've missed this out and you've missed that out and it might be better this way. And then very soon you start looking at it and thinking, it's adequate. It's not quite how I would have done it and it could be improved, but we'll go with it because it will work.
Yeah.
And then after not very long, you end up looking at it and you're thinking, well, this is very different from what I would do, and actually it's better. And that's what you want. You want to be able to turn around and say, actually, sort of, my job will be done when, sort of the young engineers who work for me are far more advanced than I am. I'm getting old now, and sort of the way that technology is going, there's some things that I really won't be able to cope with. I started off on a drawing board. Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So when one of those engineers is my boss, then that will be the perfect thing. That they will have taken over. So that's the idea. But it is the whole way that things go with trying to improve quality and trying to stop making mistakes is you want the whole process to be as automated as possible. And the problem with that is you stop people from thinking. So if you've got a new engineer or a young engineer, you try and stop them from using those spreadsheets and those calculations packages and say, right, if you had a clean sheet of paper, how would you design this? How would you do the calculations to make sure that, well, we do brakes, make sure that the pistons don't fall out of the caliper, and all those kind of things. Work that out from first principles and see what you come up with. And then you'll get an idea of how you design things and what's the best way to design things. And I think that works. And yeah.
Because it's a critical thinking part. It's the same with the AI coming up. And I always say it's only as good as the person using it.
Yeah.
And I love the way you do that, and you just allow people to actually go away and think about it and come back, because you get a lot of people who hire people and then tell them what to do.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like you're using them to the best of their own capacity, because they might have better ideas.
Yeah.
But they never get the chance to show it, because we've always done it this way. It's kind of the mantra with a lot of businesses, unfortunately. Yeah. But it's great to know Alcon aren't like that. So
Yes.
I love that. Thank you so much. You're also at the minute, actually hold on, let's go to this. So 3 of your 4 chief engineers at Alcon were apprentice trained. What does that say about what actually gets people to the top? So have you seen a mix of people from different backgrounds?
Yeah, I think if you looked at the backgrounds of the engineers we've got, it is quite varied, and there is quite an even split between apprentice trained and graduate trained. What gets you to the top? I don't think it's actually anything to do with background or training. I think it is there are some people who will gravitate to the top. There'll be, it's basically the people who will speak up more at meetings and will come up with the ideas and will actually have that drive. I think people are born into management, not necessarily trained into it. So I think that's the way it is, and I think one of the reasons why perhaps we have more apprentice trained chief engineers is maybe almost a generational thing, that if you're of a certain age, you're probably more likely to have started in engineering via the apprentice route.
Yeah.
So that balance may actually change as there are more graduates, and that the pool might be bigger for the people who get into that kind of management role.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's so different everywhere. Brilliant. Right, we're going to go on to just how things work at Alcon, because I find it really interesting, because not many companies that work the way Alcon do in terms of kind of training and developing their people. Walk me through what actually happens when a grad joins Alcon. What does the rotation look like? Why does it work when most grad schemes fail?
I think part of it is the knowledge that when you employ somebody, you're not employing them to hit the ground running. You might, if you're looking for an experienced engineer, you may be trying to recruit somebody from a competitor or vehicle manufacturer, and they can come in with the experience and very quickly they can be doing their job. But if you're recruiting somebody who is straight out of university, then you know that it will be some time before they're actually adding value to the department. If you know that, then you want to accelerate that process as quickly as possible. So, when you employ somebody, you don't actually have them sitting in your department for quite a time. You send them to go and work in the test shop and basically stand and see how things are tested. You send them into the manufacturing so that they can see how the machines work and what the process is with that. One of the key areas is putting them into assembly so they can find out and actually know physically how our products go together. And that's a good learning process. What you don't want is to have somebody straight in and they never actually touch a component, and they'll design things and not necessarily, you may not be able to put them together. If I go back to sort of earlier days of engineering, even to the time that I was at Rover, what you used to do was you used to have a thing called a buck shop, which was a great big room where basically people would take early components and start putting them together, and basically you'd have an underbonnet area and you'd be putting different bits of the engine together, and the idea was that physically you would know how difficult it was to get to different parts for assembly and servicing.
Okay.
And as gradually the buck shops closed, you lost that, and everything is just put together on 3D CAD. Before that, you're going back to you design things on a drawing board or on 2D CAD, and you weren't able to take things and put things into big assemblies on in 3D. So you could only do them physically. If you're doing everything purely virtually, then you can stick something in an area on an engine that, first of all, is completely impossible to actually assemble. Or when it comes to servicing, you'll have to take out almost the whole engine just to change an oil filter. You don't want that, and the only way you're really going to learn that is if you are having the physical assembly skills. So with us, if we send somebody out into our machine shop, first of all, they can make sure that you can machine it, that if you're drilling a hole, you can actually get the drill to the hole and there's not things in the way. And if you're in assembly, you can make sure that the parts do actually go together in the right order and there's nothing in the way of the assembly. And as well as learning that, you're building the relationships with other people in the company. So that is really key. Spending time in quality is important, because then you see how things are measured and how important that side is. And also spending time in sales. So that's the way an apprenticeship used to work. You're just doing it very quickly. And that's the way that you get somebody to be more useful more quickly.
I love that process.
It is not a new process. So when I was an apprentice,
Yeah.
they also used to recruit what they call graduate trainees. So generally, you'd recruit a raw graduate. They would do a 2-year mini apprenticeship. So whilst an apprentice would spend 12 months in a machine shop learning how machines worked, they would spend 3 months. And basically, if we spent 6 months in a design office, they might spend 3 months. So it was that kind of thing. And at the end of their traineeship, they then were design engineers or development engineers, the same as we were. So effectively, after that process, they came out of their time in the same way that we came out of their time. It's just they were a little bit older and a bit more qualified than we were.
Interesting. So do you see a lot of companies still working that way, the way Alcon are currently running their grad schemes?
I think some are, and some are, the whole apprenticeship thing has changed in some ways. So there's lots of degree apprenticeships, which you get the best of both worlds. You're employing somebody who is a little bit older, 18 rather than 16, and you're getting to the point where they finish their apprenticeship with a degree, and that's perfect. And there's lots of companies in the Midlands who are doing that, and that's a really good way to do it. Some people do it where they go through an ordinary apprenticeship, and then at the end of the apprenticeship they sponsor the apprentices to go and get a degree part-time. And then you've got that. So there's lots of different ways to do it. Another thing that we found useful is taking on doing internships. So after the first couple of years of your degree, you can then come to somewhere like Alcon, spend 12 months with us, and we'll put you on rotation around the departments, and then you go and finish your final year of your degree, and hopefully there'll be a place for you to come back to us and work for us. And we've basically skipped that year or so of training that you need.
That makes sense. I think some companies do that, but there's not a lot of companies, and I think it's the majority are probably the bigger businesses. You see a lot of smaller businesses say that they don't have the time or the capacity to do it. But I think it has to be a joint. Everyone has to be involved in helping these grads and apprentices be trained, because the skills gap is getting bigger. A lot of people, like you said, are getting to the point where they are going to retire soon. Then who's there to replace them? And if you haven't got anyone else coming up and you're not willing to train people because you don't have the time, you can't just rely on the big companies to train them and then try and poach them. I just think it's a really lazy way of trying to build a business.
It's quite nice. You can look around Alcon and you can see the different engineers and how they've got in there. So one of the motorsport engineers, he did a 12-month internship with us. He then went back, and now he is one of our motorsport design engineers, which is perfect. You've got sort of one of the young lads who works for me who came straight from university, and we've tried to train him up, and 3 years down the road he is showing promise as being an extremely good and one of the best engineers that we'll probably have. Another engineer who works for me, he joined us at 18. He did his apprenticeship. He's worked for me since he's come out of his apprenticeship, and we allowed him to go to university 1 day a week over the last couple of years, and he's just graduated.
Oh, amazing.
And we've got one of the other engineers who works for one of the other chief engineers. She did exactly the same. She did her apprenticeship, and then she was sponsored at the same time, and she's come out with a first. So, there are lots of routes. One of the things I'm quite proud of is when I joined Alcon, because I had come through an apprenticeship route, I was asked to keep an eye on one of the apprentices who was going through the manufacturing apprenticeship route. And he now is one of our production engineering managers, and he runs the assembly production engineers. When there is a problem that needs solving or something needs adding to the assembly line, the way that he solved those problems and the speed at which he solves those problems is fantastic. And I can remember when he was just sort of quite a young engineer training. Now he is one of the quite a senior person in the company.
That's
so
amazing.
It's you see the people coming from their training and moving into those kind of roles, and you think we've got something right.
You have. What do you think it is specifically? Do you think it's the way you build those internships out and those programs, or?
I think it's a culture.
Okay. Well.
So we're very lucky with the management that we've got, that they see the value of having quite a diverse workforce. The more diverse the workforce you have, the more pool of ideas that you have, and that's what you want. We started off as a motorsport company. We are a high technology company, so therefore you want the best team, and that means you've got to have no prejudices really on who you recruit. You need a good age range. You need male and female. You need people with various levels of neurodiversity. You need all sorts of backgrounds to give you the best pool of ideas, and that's the culture that we have. And as I said, our engineering director has a PhD. He's not worried the fact that he's got senior engineers working for him who haven't even got a degree. That doesn't worry him because he wants the people with the best ideas, and that just flows through the whole business.
That's great, that is, because people think the best engineers are ones with the first that come out of graduate, and some people think best engineers are those that are apprentice trained. But like I said, it's a mix. This is an interesting one. So if another manufacturer wanted to copy what Alcon does tomorrow, what's the one thing they'd get wrong?
I think a lot of it does again come down to the culture. You've got to have a drive that you want to produce the best products, and also make money. So if you're purely money focused, then you're looking at today, not tomorrow. If you're purely engineering focused, you're looking at the best designs regardless of the cost. So it is that culture. If you're a manufacturing company and you don't build that culture and you don't employ the right people at a senior level, you will just employ engineers regardless, and you'll do it on qualifications, and you just won't get anywhere.
What do you do different in your interviews? Because I know everyone interviews very differently. What's your process, and how do you lead your interviews? Are they competency-based questions? Do you sit with them and go, hey, what do you think about this? How would you approach this? What do you normally do?
Well, we've been through this process recently because we've just recruited a new principal engineer in my area, and the first part of that was we just had a quick Teams meeting. Just first of all, if you're employing somebody, you're not just only trying to get the best person to come to your company. You're also trying to sell your company to the person you're employing. There's no point in employing somebody on false pretenses and they come and they're unhappy and they leave. So it's almost a warts and all conversation of, this is how we work. This is what you'll be doing. Is this right for you?
Yeah.
And also the other way around is just getting to know them as to whether they will actually fit within the team. And that is, really important, that you don't want somebody who is going to disrupt the company, or sort of not. You can have the best engineer in the world if they're not.
Yeah.
If they're not going to work with everybody else, then it's not worth employing them. So very much that initial half an hour conversation that you can have on Teams will wheedle out the people that you think, they ought to be working for a large engineering company, not a small one. They are going to be very specialist, or they're not going to quite fit, or they haven't got the interest in what we do, that we won't be able to give them enough really to occupy their minds or their interest. So you get that, and then you bring them in for a more formal interview, and that really it's lasted about half a day for that process of a conversation, and in that process our engineering director sat in and interviewed as well to make sure that he was happy, and a tour of the company and just an understanding of what's going on. And you can tell pretty much from the questions that they ask and also the questions that you ask them, a lot of the time actually standing over a machine or standing over a test rig, you get a feel as to their competency and their enthusiasm. And it's really sort of after that you know whether you'd want to make an offer or not.
I love that you do that, because I always say to everyone who interviews anywhere, whether it's in my client's role, go on site. And also, I always say to my clients, take them onto the shop floor, because that's the best you'll get out of an engineer. Is sitting them down in front of you and getting them to explain something that's hypothetical. It can be really difficult because engineers aren't wired like that. They need to see and feel stuff. So I was like, take them out. And it works so much better because, like you said, you can weed out whether or not they are interested. You can read their body language, the way they're talking about it, but also how they communicate with the other teams as well.
Yeah. It's less intimidating as well. So if you want to have a good conversation with somebody, quite often, if you're even doing a one-to-one, sitting in a meeting, well, basically what we're doing now, sitting opposite each other, that can be quite intimidating, especially in an interview.
Yeah.
So actually going for a walk where you're side by side, you're not making that much eye contact, and then you actually can sometimes get more out of an interviewee. So that whole process of spending perhaps a couple of hours walking around the machine shop and the test shop, that's where you get the really interesting stuff, and that's how you really get to know the potential engineer.
Yeah, I'm like that. I have to walk to think as well. I can't just sit and just answer questions. I find it quite difficult personally. You know, it's like if you were to sit in an interview, I have to, even when I'm on the phone, I sometimes walk and I talk. I find it easier. Not everyone's the same.
No.
So I think you have to kind of level the playing field a bit with some people. But
yes, it prompts conversation as well. If you walk past a machine or you walk past a product, then they'll say, oh, that's similar to how we did it, or that's similar to what I've done before, or I've seen this done before, or this is how I did that.
Yeah.
And you end up with a conversation that you won't have when you're sitting opposite them.
Yeah, and if anyone's brave enough, they'll go, why are you doing that like that?
Yes.
I would do it like this. These are stats that I've looked at. So there are reportedly 3 engineering jobs right now for every 1 qualified candidate. Yet companies still sit on vacancies for months rather than actually training anyone up. What do you think the reason is, the real reason? Is it cost? Is it risk? Is it something cultural?
I think it's all of those. If you're, engineers are not the most lowly paid of people.
Yeah.
We're not paid as much as we should be,
no,
but in any way.
Yeah.
But it is a highly qualified job and quite a highly paid job, or should be. So you don't want to take the risk of employing somebody to find out after 6 months they're not right, because it costs a lot of money to employ somebody. So you've got to be sure. Engineers can tend to be very cautious as well. It's in our nature that we want to always do the best. So if something's not quite right, or if the candidate is not sort of 90% there on what you think, you'll think, well, perhaps we'll wait. So that's where you've got to be quite a cash-rich company to take too much of a chance on too many people. So you've got that caution. It is the idea that full well that when you employ somebody, it's not going to give you that value for a certain amount of time. So are you in the right place to lose some of your time while you're training somebody up, and also pay somebody who is not going to be overly productive? So that's very much a cost thing. And then, it is, have you got the right quality of engineers around? We've got lots of very good engineers graduating and finishing training who aren't going into engineering because finance or something else will pay them more highly.
Wow.
So we've got to try and retain the interest and get the right kind of people into engineering. It's also a cultural kind of thing as well, is that the person who comes and services your washing machine will call themselves an engineer, but also the person who's designed your car or the components of your car are engineers. And the people who are down the road who have done all the engineering to specify HS2 and everything, they are engineers. The reason why our cars are safe is because of engineers. So basically, everything in this room, the cameras and everything, they are down to engineers. But we don't respect them enough in this country. If you're in some other professions, it's, oh wow, you're doing that.
Yeah.
But engineers, well, no, I've just called an engineer to service my washing machine. That's not very special.
Oh, yeah. I think it's been diluted depending on what industry you come from. But I love the whole engineering space. Is why I recruit in it myself.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating, and I find it fascinating how people just move up. And the money's definitely not where it should be at all. But do you think that's what putting a lot of engineers off and moving into different areas rather than picking engineer as an ending?
I think the best engineers will be engineers no matter what. You can't stop yourself from doing what you're doing. It's inside you, and even if you end up not doing an engineering job, you'll find that they'll have a lathe or something in their garage, or they'll be making things. So you really can't help yourself. It's a very diverse field. So you have got the people who are lucky enough to design things, and it's one of the nicest things possible when you're walking down the road and you sort of look at a car and you think, that brake caliper, I designed that, or that vehicle, I worked on that vehicle, I've done some of that. So that is that's why a lot of us do it. But then there's the people behind that who are the quality engineers who are making sure that the product is to specification. There's the development engineers who are doing all the test work and out in the vehicles, test driving and getting all the test data. There's the production engineers who are programming the machines and designing the fixtures and sorting out the processes. All these things contribute to the product that is in the car that you're driving. And they're all extremely valid, and they're all extremely clever people who really want to do a good job. But where do you fit in that? Where do you go? Which area do you go? It's very difficult to know who's best in what role.
It's a tough one, isn't it? And I was having this conversation with someone yesterday, and they were just really just frustrated that they hadn't moved up as quick as they probably should be, and they're finding it really difficult to find a lead role, although they have managed teams before. But they work for startups, and startups that aren't unfortunately around at the minute. They went into administration for many different reasons. And I don't know what your take is on this, but it'd be good to get your opinion on this. I've said to a lot of engineers that came out of those startups, you can't expect the same money somewhere else. You also may have worked at a lead role but it's in a company that wasn't successful. Yeah. Do you think working in a business as a manager, and some of these people are in their, I would say, early 30s, mid 30s, managing 30, 40 people. For me, that's a big thing. Like, are you where you need to be in your career at that point to be able to support everybody in those different areas? Because you need to be well-rounded yourself. Yeah. What's your take on that?
I think there are some people who are doing those kind of roles relatively early. I was managing people in my 20s and running an engineering department in my early 30s. It can happen. Mm-hmm. And some people will gravitate to that, some people won't. I think it is difficult because different companies will run in different ways, and if you're in certain companies, the chief engineer may be in that role for 25, 30 years. While he's in that role, you're not going to get that role, and the highest you're going to probably get is a principal engineer. Yeah. So there's a certain amount of dead men's shoes in some of that. If there are opportunities and you're not seeing them, then it's looking at what you're doing about it. Senior managers and directors and the people who will be making the decisions on your progress, they actually want to know you're there. Yeah. So if you're always the person who sits quietly in the corner of the office, doing a really good job, but you're not actually making yourself visible by speaking up at meetings or sending in ideas on how things could be improved or all sorts of things, you're not going to get noticed. So the important thing is actually being noticed as having potential. It really is down to you to push yourself, not to say, well, I've been doing a really good job, I've been doing it for 30 years, why am I still doing that job? Well, it's because you've appeared to be content doing that job, and you haven't shown that you want more. And the other thing is you do promote people on a certain amount of commitment. So the person who arrives just before the start time and leaves at the end of daytime, again, isn't going to get noticed. You probably do need, if there's a crisis, to show that you're the person who will stay and sort it out, the person who's quite happy going to a customer or a supplier and talking to them. and there was a certain amount of confidence. The more senior you get, the more interface you have with customers and suppliers and other departments. So there's a certain amount of confidence and a certain amount of ability to talk to people. And some engineers will just never have the confidence to talk to a customer in another country or different things like that. So it is very much, you might find that somebody who is perhaps not as intelligent as other engineers ends up being more senior because they might be more outgoing, or they might be a bit more quick thinking on their feet.
Or shout about what they do.
Yes.
I think a lot of people don't actually talk about the stuff that they've achieved or their ideas.
Yeah.
And it's great because I know a lot of leaders will go, oh, you know, it was a team effort. But where do you draw the line of going, it was a team effort and actually, you know what, it was my idea? Because there's a fine line, isn't there? You don't want to annoy your team, but also if it was your idea, would you still go, oh, it was my idea?
I think people know. People generally know if it was your idea or not, because if you worked in that team or you've led that team, you will actually know that person was the kind of person who'd come up with that idea, or you'll have overheard the conversations that pushed for that idea. The worst thing you'd have is actually having a manager who listens to all of that and then tells the more senior managers, it was my idea and I told them to do that. Oh, yeah. That's not going to work.
No, it won't.
It is very much that. It's very much down to you to do that. The other thing is actually being a bit different. So again, if you're in a department of Tim's, sorry, anyone who's called Tim.
Hi, Tim.
But if you're in a department of people who are very much the same, if you're the one who's different, good or bad, you will stand out. The longer that I've been in engineering and the more sort of graduate type engineers have been in departments, the more I've felt a little bit out of place, because I am now in engineering, sort of the part of a group that is smaller, being not graduate trained. But also, I never felt that I was a proper engineer. I wasn't really the person who would naturally go into engineering. So when I'm looking at problems and things, I may look at those problems in a different way to somebody who has been more traditionally trained as a graduate into solving engineering problems. So I might, I say sort of my better subjects at school were things like English, literature, and history. So that's not a natural engineering route. But what it means is that you may actually come up with solutions or ideas that are different from purely looking at the standard route of calculating things, or some engineers are really good engineers because they're better at art than engineering, because you have the spatial awareness that adds to that. If you've got more of a history bias, you may actually do more research on what's been done before. One of my proudest moments as an engineer it was working on a high performance road car. So this is sort of £250,000 car, goes over 250 miles an hour. And they had a very specific specification for the brakes that our competitors couldn't actually come up with. They wanted the car to be able to be driven around a track and feel like a track car, but also you could drive it around town and it would feel okay and not be dangerous. And if you're doing it from a modern point of view, that's very difficult. The componentry doesn't seem to be there. And the historian in me just thought, well, we used to have brake systems like this. So what made this car a leading car in its field at the time was the fact that I found something that was taken off a 1973 Vauxhall Viva and put that into the system, and it gave them the perfect feel that they wanted. And that's something that you won't get if you have a department of Tims. You need the person who will say, well, actually, sort of what you had on 1960s Minis and old Aston Martins and stuff like that, that is the feel that you want. So let's find out what those components were, and let's see if they're still available, and let's put it in the system and try it. And the calculations showed it was okay, and it worked really well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you probably, no one else in that room probably would have thought of that idea.
No.
That's That's why I say you need diverse workforce for the win,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Over a quarter of the working engineers plan to retire in the next 5 years, which we all know.
Yes.
Do you think Alcon versus, if you were to look at Alcon and where you are now versus other companies that you know of, do you think you're prepared for that?
I think you'd always say that you're not as prepared as you should be.
Yeah.
But I think we are probably as prepared as anyone could be. It is this workforce where you've got older people and younger people, so you've got that good mix and a good mix of experience, and we're open to taking on apprentices and graduates, so it's just widened that field. So effectively our pool of people, by allowing people from both backgrounds, doubles our pool of potential engineers. So that probably makes us better. The other thing is, which I haven't touched on, but is quite key, that seems to happen at Alcon, is it's using the pool of talent for the whole company. So there will be people who are operating machines and assembling components who have the enthusiasm and the drive, who will want to do something different. So we have people in our sales department, and we've had people in our purchase department and various areas, and in our development shop, who were on the shop floor, and they've moved into a sort of office-based job, and sort of being trained and are now in that area. So it's having that flexibility to say, we don't want just new people who have got the right qualifications. Let's see if we can find people who've had the hands-on experience who can actually add something as well.
Within the current workforce, which makes sense.
Yeah.
That's where I think people should be picking from, especially when they're trying to hire senior people and you've already got a team full of people who potentially could do that job.
Yeah.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah. The best salesmen are going to be the people who know the product and know the processes and really believe in how it's being done. So what better way to go and sell Alcon than somebody who stood at a workbench and put the things together and knows how it all works.
Yeah, because generally I think a lot of engineers can talk in technical terms, but also can talk in layman terms for people that maybe don't understand it as much. But they also can get to the problem.
Yeah.
So if you can understand the customer's problem and you can solve it, that's sales, isn't it?
Yeah.
But if they don't have a problem you can solve, then you're not wasting time on trying to win something that is just never going to get over the line.
I've been to customers who, you go as an engineer and the customer will be really glad that you've gone as an engineer. What they don't want is somebody who adds no more value than if they just had a catalogue. They don't want that. They want somebody who's actually adding value in that meeting. Most people are quite clever enough these days to go on the internet and search for the product that they want. They don't want somebody to go in and basically do that for them in front of them. They want somebody who they can then take the technical conversation with.
That's very true. I think a lot of companies need to change the way they have their sales departments. But most value comes from engineers for sure, because I find a lot of people who don't have the experience then take engineers with them.
Yes.
But then you're utilising two people from a business, which just doesn't make sense in terms of value, return on investment and time. So do you think AI could take over certain roles or parts of it?
This is a subject that lots of people are talking about at Alcon. I think the hope is it takes out some of the more laborious tasks, the data crunching. If you've got a lot of development data, you end up with a spreadsheet of a lot of information that you need to try and find and sort, and that's mind-numbingly boring and takes time. So if AI can do that part for you, great. And what you don't want to do is do everything by AI and have everything automated, because then you lose the ability to think. So there's definitely always going to be a role for engineers, because they will be the problem solvers. It doesn't matter in what industry the people who come from a science or engineering background are going to be the problem solvers. And there was somebody on the radio a few weeks ago who used to work for one of the AI companies who actually said the companies that will be at a premium in the future will be the ones who don't embrace AI.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because, in simple terms, if you always rely on your sat nav, you forget how to read a map and you forget where everything is.
I don't know how to read a map.
No. And, sort of, if you, we were used to using an old-fashioned railway timetable, you have a certain amount of skill at visualising all of that rather than just going onto the train line and saying, I want to go from here to here after this time, and it tells you what the time is and that's it. So that kind of thing takes away our ability to think. If you train people up how to think and you try to get them to do the job first of all without using AI at all, then they'll be much better at using AI, and also they'll be much better at solving a problem.
Yeah.
So, it's using AI is as much of an opportunity as not using AI, and it's getting that balance within a company. And you do need to remember, sort of your engineers are the problem solvers. Sir Patrick Vallance did an interview on the radio a couple of years ago about government, and he was the one who was supposed to be pushing science and engineering within government and everything, and he was shocked at how few engineers and scientists are in the civil service. They don't want to employ people who are not like them a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So even in the Department of Manufacturing or Science, he said less than 10% of people were from a science or engineering background, which is crazy. And he said if he took one of those few scientists who were in that area, and put them into a completely different department, say Department of Agriculture and Fisheries or something, and put them in there, the first thing is everybody says, well, what have we got this scientist in here for? We don't want that. We want an economist, or we want somebody who's got a different background. They're going to be useless in here. He said then after a while they actually see the value, because they are the ones who've gone in and solved the problems. It's the way their mind works will solve those problems, and it's almost, well, can't we have more of them? So really it's not just in engineering and not just in design that engineers should be going in. Anybody who has that kind of background or that understand to solve problems should be at a premium in any company to go in there and by those problem solving techniques that you either know or you've been taught, you will be able to solve other problems for people.
That's crazy, isn't it? Because not a lot of people would even have thought that, and they probably were shocked when it happened. Like, oh, actually, this is kind of what he's talking about.
Yeah. Yes.
A nice surprise.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Because I know with AI, I use it every day, but I don't rely on it. So I can read through it, and I always triple check, because, again, sometimes I'm like, that doesn't make sense, and I'll confirm it doesn't, and I'll change it myself. But if you don't know what you're looking for and you're just using AI, it's very likely it's all probably going to be.
I go back to a time when designs were done on the drawing board, and test work was done in a very analog way, and then I can remember some of the early analysis software coming in, and it was a case of sort of you put a design in, and you'd set the parameters, and the analysis may take hours to actually come through. That would be equivalent to be done in seconds today. And that wasn't very normal, having that kind of analysis. So if you went back that far, you were having to solve problems on paper. I think when I started, the only computer we had in the department at AP was a BBC 64K computer. That was it, and people were programming things on Fortran on there. So to go from solving problems very much on paper and drawing things in 2D and not really using computers to using computers for everything, we may lose something if we don't actually have that understanding of the absolute basics of why things happen, and experimenting and playing around with things. And quite often you'll learn more from playing around and seeing things practically than just taking the data. And it gives you an economy of scale on some of these things. So if you get a figure out of analysis piece of software that tells you that the pressure is sort of 100 bar, because of what you've done practically, you may think, yeah, that looks about right. If you haven't got that experience and it comes out at 1,000 bar, you may actually not actually know that that is wrong. So you've got to have that experience of actually sometimes actually hooking something up to an analog pressure gauge and actually seeing how much it is and seeing the limits. And then when you see something, you get that scale and you actually understand, yeah, those results seem about right. So how it was set and what you were saying about AI is only actually as good as the inputs and the person using it. Well, those inputs and the person using it need to actually know the first principles and have done something practically to know that what they're getting out is right.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, this one's an interesting one. I think I said this to you already, didn't I? If your own kid came to you at 18
Yep.
and said, Dad, should I go uni or get an apprenticeship? What would you actually tell them?
I would tell the first thing is tell them to do what they think is right for them. Because I went down the engineering route. It wasn't the sort of the ideal thing for what I thought, but it was just how you got led at the time. So the important thing is, I think you'll have a happier and more successful life if you're doing something you want to do, regardless of what that is. I've actually been through that. I've got 2 grown-up children, and my son always showed an aptitude for art. Actually, both of them are very good at art, and so he wanted to study art, and he went to university and he studied fine art. And whilst lots of people were saying you won't make much money in art, sort of he was clever enough to go into science or engineering. He had the grades and all of that. You need to go and use that because you'll earn more money as an engineer or a doctor or whatever. And we stood firm and said, no, if he wants to go into art, he can do art. It's entirely up to him. And he graduated, but while he was graduating and while he was doing his A-levels, he had started working for different YouTubers and funded pretty much a lot of his university by doing thumbnails for different YouTubers, and he's continued to do that, and that is his full-time job. Is he will be messaged by a YouTuber partway through the day who will say, I am putting out this video of this particular game, because it's generally gamers who he's working for. Can you do me a bit of artwork for that? And I need it by this time. And he'll just go and he'll go onto his digital drawing tablet and he'll draw it up and send it to them. And certain times of the year he's designing T-shirts or posters or different things.
That's amazing.
And he's earning a really good living out of it, and he's able to work from home because he's self-employed and he works the hours that he wants to during the day. So he lives near the coast, he can go for a walk on the beach or something and then come back and do the job. So that is the thing of saying, it doesn't matter what I think as a parent, it doesn't matter what I think of earning power or anything. If you're going to enjoy it, do it. My daughter the same. She's done so many jobs and applied for so many different things because she could practically do an awful lot of different stuff. So she's worked for companies doing sort of outward bound type things. So she's been throwing people off zip wires and stuff like that. Making sure the knots are all okay first.
Notches off your teeth.
Yeah, and then about 18 months ago, she applied for Octopus Energy, and she's working for them, and she really loves that. And it was not the kind of thing that we would have thought she would have done, but she's there doing that and enjoying it, and again making herself known. People see her, and now sometimes when people ring up, they will only want to talk to her.
Oh, that's great.
Or she's running the wellbeing stuff and all that kind of stuff. So there's no right or wrong. As a parent, it's not really down to you to say you ought to be doing this, you should go to university, or you should do an apprenticeship, or you should just go out and start earning money. That is down to them. We're there to support them.
I love that you said that, because that's it. My daughter's only 8, so she's nowhere near that. But my thing is, you bring kids into this world to help and support them, not to tell them what to do with their lives. And my thing with her is you find out what you enjoy. And I feel like even at 18, figuring out what you want to do for the rest of your life it's a big thing, and I think it's way too young. So use your 20s to do lots of different things and figure out what you want to do, because some people don't know what they want to do, and I think that's absolutely fine. But I love that you've done that with your kids, so I hope more people do that.
I think there was a vicar that we once knew who, when it came to christening children, he would tell the parents that your children grow up in spite of you, not because of you. And also, they're only given to you for a certain amount of time. They're not your possession. You basically look after them until they can go make their way in the world. So if you have those almost those principles that they need to make their decisions, and you're not controlling them, and you have no right to tell them what they do when they grow up, then hopefully they will do what is best for them and be happy. And all you want really is for your kids to be happy and enjoy life. And that's basically it.
I thought you should start teaching parents how to. Because I go to so many debates about this to some of my friends, and I'm like, you can't. You just have to let them go.
Yeah.
And like you said, they're only yours for a small amount of time.
Yeah.
Because that dynamic also changes as you get older. The dynamic isn't parent and child; it's adult and adult.
Yes.
Isn't it? So.
And if you try and control them too much, they're not going to want to know you when they're older. They will resent that and they will walk away. So it is very much you, as early as you possibly can. You are talking to them as adults. They are little people, and the sooner you do that, the better.
Definitely. Well, this was lovely, Mike. Thank you so much. Learned so much, and I know this is going to be so valuable for so many people, because the conversations I have on a daily basis is all around sometimes grads and apprentices, but also recruitment and hiring. And not a lot of people do it the way that Alcon do, and I feel like they can learn so much from yourself. So thank you so much for coming.
All right, well, thank you for asking me.